on, guys? This is the final NA Imperial Tournament. My name is Flo, and I'm with Rodeo Boys Rainy over here. And today we're going to be hosting one of the final tournaments for this beta. How you feel right now, Rainy?
I'm feeling good. Got my tea after casting a bunch of very exciting matches over on the European scene. We're now here, back on home ground, ready for the North American tournament. I can only hope it is just as exciting or even more than the European one, because that one was good. If you guys didn't watch it, you should definitely check the VODs, because there are some very good matches in there.
Oh man, so far every tournament that the EU players have, they've had like different classes like making it to the semis and making it to the finals. So maybe we'll have a lot of differences for this NA tournament. We kind of went over it just before we turned on the stream, but we've actually had like I believe it's like 5 or 6 Force Masters sitting in placement matches that year. So maybe we'll see a Force Master in the semifinals, guys. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a very high amount of Force Master representation today. I think we counted them earlier and there were about like 5. So there's a good chance that we'll see some Force Masters making it high into the tournament, and that's always really fun to see. Now, so far in all the tournaments we run, we've had, in terms of tournament winners, we had Destroyers, Blade Dancers, I think 1 Summoner win. We've had a Force Master win, which was Bev over on the European server. And then we've just had a Kung Fu Master win. Am I missing any classes? I think those are all the classes that have been represented. That's a pretty good distribution of classes, I think.
Yeah.
The only ones that we have really yet to see, I suppose, is the Blade Master really show up in a big way, and then also the Assassin. So, actually kind of interesting. Just like I said last week when we were doing this, I'm really like, Assassin is the one that really surprises me the most. I really think it's a class that should have done really well. Maybe there's just not that many good Assassin players out there that want to compete in the tournament or something. I'm not sure.
I think that in all honesty, there has even been like some Assassin representation, and because of that, now at this point, it's Blade Master. We need to see some big Blade Masters, at least seeing Blade Master in the quarters, or at least in terms of NA, because I've been focusing a lot on the NA tournaments. Seeing a lot of like a really big Force Master and Blade Master representation is something that I would be gunning for. I think though, in terms of this particular bracket, there isn't any Blade Masters, right? Let me double check real quick.
Let me double check that. Yeah, for some reason I feel like Blade Master is just a very underrepresented class in North America. And I think they're, in terms of class balancing around the 45 area, I think they're a little weaker, but they're not too far behind. I don't think they're not too far behind. I feel like there should be some that at least make it to the semifinals, you know. But then again, saying that, of course, like the player skill is really, like the top players will play things that they feel are very strong in the meta, and then they'll be really great at playing the game themselves, right? And then if you factor that in, the amount of top players we have on, well, top players for the current meta and the current scenario we have, they've kind of been dominating the scene, and so unless there was a Blade Master that has experience playing in like the other regions, and he's been playing a long time, and you know has a lot of experience in kind of tournament PvP scenarios, maybe it makes sense that we don't see a lot of Blade Masters.
That alongside the fact that so far we haven't really seen the some of the top Blade Masters in the tournament so far. Like I might have seen Genie in the previous tournaments. I'm not too sure, but at least in terms of, I guess mainly because we haven't seen that. Like we've just recently started streaming the quarterfinals rather than just the finals into the finals into the finish. But yeah, I think that hopefully we'll see a lot of class representation just to break that whole mindset of this class is OP, this class is OP, whatever. The more diversity that we see, the more interesting that the overall game is going to appeal to, like, I guess the entire gaming population. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand, and of course it's still very early in kind of like the competitive scenario of the game, so still a lot of life ahead of it. That being said, though, there are some very familiar names that show up time and time and time again in these tournaments, and I think for good reason. We had a little bit talk about that earlier on, the details that I don't really care to go much into right now, but these players have consistently shown their skill level and their consistency and kind of their attention to the game that they've spent. And so what I'm really waiting for is that time, like, once the client is released in North America and Europe, then that'll give time for certain players who have interest in it but just did not have the opportunity to play in the foreign servers or did not care because of the ping or whatever it was, or the language barrier, to develop their skill and then come up and challenge these guys that are, you know, currently sitting in the semifinals and the finals and making these big runs. So as the scene grows, I'm really looking forward to who rises up from kind of like obscurity into, you know, into a really great player, and that's very interesting to me. Whenever I watch a lot of different competitive esports and whatnot, like Quake, like League of Legends, and games like that, especially the super old ones. So what comes to mind is like Counter-Strike and fighting games, Quake also. You know, sometimes after a long time of playing these games, like somebody comes up and he is just like the perfect player, the culmination of everything that's great. You know, something reminiscent of like Flash or Jadal in StarCraft. You know, it had such a long competitive history, and then what was constructed out of this was like this perfect competitor, and that's really what I'm hoping to, you know, stay around in the scene long enough to witness. That's really exciting to me.
Yeah, of course. I think that as at least from someone who's been in like competitive gaming myself, I feel like being the challenger has always ended up being a lot more interesting overall. So seeing players and seeing them just kind of like they're aware these are the top people right now. Okay, so these are the guys that I need to beat. They have nothing to lose. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Maybe they aren't representing themselves as big in the community as other players, but the fact that they're kind of like hidden into the shadows in a sense,
Yeah.
and just being able to just dominate the scene, just to be like, who is this guy? Who is this dark horse? Who is this like straight out of the woods like village peasant coming out of nowhere? You know, like
It's the classic story, right?
Oh.
Like, it's like the Shakespearean, like the Joker, the jester is always the most intelligent of the cast of characters. It's kind of that, right? The person you least expect, you know, the man in the hood just enters a tournament and he's the one that ends up taking it. That's always very exciting to watch.
Yeah, just like I'm just really hoping that like we get to see a lot of like kind of MLG feel kind of matches. It's like things you don't really expect. There's a lot of stuff that like I was kind of taking a preview at the EU tournament. There's a lot of things that definitely I did not expect. Like a lot of plays I did not expect. I'm sure you were a lot more excited than I was while you were shoutcasting that. So if you can drop us like a quick maybe recap of that, since I didn't catch all the matches. What did you feel about
In the European tournament, there were a few interesting things that happened. So in general, I think in Europe, the Destroyer is much less represented, which is very interesting to me, right? So the difference, I mean, they're very similar in many ways, but there are slight differences between the North American region and the European region. And one thing that I'm told is that in the European region, the higher ranks of the ladder are filled with summoners, just everywhere. Summoners are everywhere, right? And to a certain degree, I'm not sure how true that is for North America, but I have a feeling that Blade Dancers and Destroyers are the ones that are more prominent in North America. That being said, in the European tournament scene, from the ones that we have run, Destroyers have been fairly underrepresented, actually. Whereas in North America, we often see two or so Destroyers in the semifinals, and sometimes in the quarterfinals, we'll see like 3 or so Destroyers being represented. In Europe, they're almost non-existent, but this time, in this week's tournament, we actually saw 2 Destroyers make it to the semifinal, which was, you know, impressive in its own right. But beyond that, just not starting to stray away from that topic, if we talk about the players who are very well known on the European side of the game, we start thinking of so much class diversity in terms of colorized, right? this really, really great summoner, this really fantastic player who has very good defensive play and a very good understanding of the game's mechanics and the abilities that these classes can bring. And then we also have somebody like Enel, who is a similar kind of player, except on the class of Blade Master, right? And he's somebody who has a lot of skill, a lot of depth, a lot of knowledge into this game. He's a very seasoned player. And then you have Red Eyes, who is this Grandmaster Kung Fu player, this KFM player. You know, he's just so fantastic at the game, and we got to see him demonstrate that in the tournament. And you know, the reason why, this is the thing, the reason why you didn't get to see Red Eyes perform before in the European tournaments is because he was knocked out by another Grandmaster. You know, he was knocked out by Enel in the first tournament, and then in the next tournament he was knocked out by Bev, and Bev is this just godlike Force Master, right? And so on the European scene, you have all these like really big names that play these certain classes, and it's very diverse, right? On North America, when we think of the tournament winners, we think of Daka, we think of Pomf, we think of Enda, right? And, you know, there is some class diversity, right? Where Enda represents the Destroyer, but Daka and Pomf both represent the Blade Dancer. You know, and that's really it. Then we have Panda Stick on the Summoner, and I think he's a very great player, but, you know, I'm a little hesitant to compare him to Colorized. I have a lot of respect for Panda Stick, and I think that there's things that he does very well, but I would have to see them play against each other and then play more to really make a comparison to Colorized, but my gut feeling is that Colorized is just, you know, he has that mystery about him that may put him above a player like Panda Stick, right? Daka, I think, is somebody who, you know, the winner of the last North American tournament is kind of like that for North America, right? He has that, like, that little mysterious edge to him. And similarly does Pomf also. And, you know, lately I think Enda has been a little bit quiet, but I feel like he could show up at any time too. But it's just interesting to see that the European scene, I think it's much bigger, and so there's much more opportunity for classes to represent themselves, and that's really what the most interesting thing about the European tournaments is. And when the brackets played out, that's what we saw. Just good class diversity and good gameplay.
I think part of the reason why EU just appeared so much bigger is because they've actually ran their first 64-man tournament.
Yeah.
And so far we were hoping for this current tournament to actually end in a big bang, and actually ended up with short people. We were actually just under 40 people for this tournament. So we decided to go with our standard 32 participants for this tournament. I would play, but I'm casting, guys. I'm sorry. So yeah.
Now the question is, would you represent Kung Fu Master or would you represent Blade Master?
I honestly,
I know you've been getting into that.
I mean, as much as I really like Blade Master right now because it's really fun, it's new. If I were to go into a tournament setting, you have to play to your strengths, and obviously I would be playing with Kung Fu Master since I have more experience with it. But if we were to put it both on the same level, I don't know. I don't know what I would do. I have no idea.
Well, there is. I think class diversity is always great, and it's always fun to watch. New matchups. I mean, we got to see a lot of Kung Fu Master versus Blade Master. We got to see KFM versus Blade Dancer. You know, just some really interesting, like, new things that we haven't seen, because we've seen a lot of the Blade Dancer matchups in terms of, like, Blade Dancer versus Destroyer, Blade Dancer versus Summoner, and in many ways they go in a very unique fashion, right? I would say, like, Blade Dancer, Blade Master, Kung Fu Master, like, these three classes kind of, like, play in a certain, almost what I would deem as, like, a standard kind of game of Blade and Soul PvP. And then when you start introducing assassins, and when you start introducing destroyers and summoners, right, there's, like, different things that you have to consider in terms of, like, how you open them up, what their defensive capabilities are, right? Like, assassin is a lot about the stealth game, you know, and then there's a lot of teleporting, there's a lot of tools for mobility, and that makes it a little different than facing a summoner, which is all about, like, multitasking and being aware of two different sources of danger at the same time, kind of similar to the Warlock, which we haven't seen in the Western scenario yet.
Thank God.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when that comes in. And that's another example of, you know, as the game grows, like, when this Warlock class gets introduced, what's going to happen? You know, maybe there's going to be a really good Warlock player that's going to come out of the woodwork and demonstrate some very good PvP play. So there's a lot of things that are up in the air, and right now we do what we can with the resources that we have and the players that we have and the patch that we have. But I'm really looking forward to new life in the game. when it releases, which is soon. It's very soon.
Yeah, of course. I think that like I've always been saying, like constantly, I just want us to catch up already. I want us to be able to, I want us to get really good as quick as possible as both NA and EU, just the Western side. Like, the faster this game picks up, the faster we can be like, alright, listen, we're not too far away from those Asian guys who's been spending for years. I want us to be able to get really good at whatever, regardless of what patch we're on. Like, we get really good at 45, we know the game, 50 comes, we know the game, in and out. Warlock gets introduced, we get used to it as soon as possible, we keep pushing out. And finally we could be like, alright, when we represent ourselves, NA, EU, even Russia, like over onto Worlds, hopefully that actually happens, then we can be like, like we can actually stand a fighting chance. And, we can rock whatever flags that we rock, and, like we can be like, hey,
and then whoever wins, we just go USA.
Yeah, exactly. We'd be like, hey, like we beat Jason, like in the tournament, and then he's gonna be like, I have nothing to say, like that sort of thing. That'd be really exciting to watch.
It would be a good day to see the Western world win at esports events, and Europe does very well in Counter-Strike, but Korea just every game always seems very unbeatable. For that though, I do agree with you. Catching up is definitely something that's I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to, and I can't wait for that. I feel like a little kid, just like, I want to grow up and get into this whole new world of like adults and stuff. It's a very strange feeling, but very exciting at the same time. And when the game does get released in January, we'll have a lot of time to kind of mess around with the game, even with the PvE stuff. Right, and just really get comfortable with the game and figure things out beyond just having like these small short weekends, because really that's where most of the learning is going to come from, when players are able to really sit down and just like throw their friends into a spar and just be like, hey, do this over and over and over and over again. I'm going to try every single possibility and really figure it out. So once that starts happening, I think North America can, and Europe even, can start, they can finally start pushing forward and getting better at the game.
I think that with the introduction of like the full release of the game, and once people are going to be sitting down and stuff like that, I've heard Avarice talk about this a lot, but we will be introducing future podcasts for the regions, both NA and EU, so we can actually talk about the game. Like, maybe we'll have like rather than State of the League, maybe we'll have State of BNS or something of the sort, just to kind of like
something of the sort. I like that name.
Yeah. Or like,
So it's, something
just so
of the
we
sort.
can explain like classes and like matchups. We can start explaining like everything from like PvE content to like community-based stuff. That'd be really cool. There's been some talks of other third parties who are interested in also creating their events, so we're looking to also join ourselves with them too, so that we'll have a lot more fun, and rather than just hosting these Imperial weekly tournaments, which I'm sure you guys are already used to by now. It's been like how many tournaments? Like 8 now? Something like that. So pretty crazy.
I think this is the 5th North American one. We've had 2 European ones, and there's also the High Fidelity one also run in Europe. So yeah, 8 total tournaments run not entirely by the Imperial crew, but also by one other organization. So please look forward to the podcast in the future called Something of the Sword. While we're at it, why don't we take a quick peek at the tournament we're about to cast here. We're trying to get the quarterfinals set up as the players make their way through the brackets, the round of 32 and round of 16. And there are a lot of familiar names, as expected, of course. And I think there are a lot less dropouts than before. I mean, in tournaments before, we've had weird things, where people are like, I don't really want to put... I think last week, Pomf was a no-show for the North American tournament, and I think he's representing here now. So we're going to get to see him perform. And Pomf... now, Daka won it last week, right? But Pomf classically has been the player to defeat Daka. And if I remember correctly, his absence is true for the last tournament, and Daka happened to win that. But now that Pomf is back, they will have to play each other eventually. Maybe Pomf is Daka's weakness, the Achilles heel.
I think both of their maybe it's like a triangle. You get what I'm saying, guys? Like Pomp beats Daka, Daka beats Panda, Panda beats Pomp. You know?
Oh yeah, actually, Hirotsuki from the chat reminded me that Pomp lost last week, and I think that was to Enda actually, right? That was, if I remember correctly.
No. Last week, Pomp beat Enda. Pomp lost to Panda. Panda loses to Daka. That's why I'm saying.
Now
That's
we
why
have the answer.
Illuminati boys.
That's why you have the triangle. It all comes full circle, and now we understand the brackets is who decides the winner. Oh, let's see if that holds true for this week. What was the circle that we decided it was? Pomp wins Daka. Daka wins against Panda.
Yeah.
Panda wins against Pomp. Wait, where did Enda go?
Yeah.
Somehow Enda disappeared. Enda is just like the fourth leg of the triangle, just nowhere, just somewhere out there in the 4D, fourth dimension. But either way, yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the brackets, and we mostly have the round of 16 filled out, and some notable names that have made it through. Madoshi versus Enda again. Oh my god, and I feel, I can't help but feel so bad for Madoshi, because I know that he plays against Enda a lot, and I have never personally witnessed Madoshi win against Enda. I've never personally witnessed it. I know they played a lot more than I've seen, but even in the last tournaments, like, he seems to always get matched up against Enda and always lose. And we've just never seen him,
I'm just gonna have to cut you off there real quick, because from what from a lot of the practice matches, it's more at least from what Avarice is saying, since Avarice is in his guild too. Maybe in terms of tournament settings. So far we've seen Madoshi lose to Enda in a tournament setting. But in terms of their competitive spars against each other,
he's actually ahead.
Madoshi is actually, it's 60-40. That's how it's kind of going right now. So we can definitely
the tournament nerves.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to me, actually. So maybe Madoshi can make an upset. I'm really excited for that, because obviously a Force Master in the quarterfinals and possibly in the semifinals is a very interesting idea to me. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if he's been doing that well in spars, then I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be able to translate that success into the tournament. But tournament nerves are a real thing, for sure. So let's go ahead and look at some more spots. I believe Arrow is the other one above. He's in the bracket above Enda, and he's an assassin player, is that right? Then he's going to be facing either X-Shadow or Arusa, whoever wins from those two. We don't really know yet. Below that is going to be Kyor, I think, is that how you read his name? Kyor, Kaiser?
Yeah, we'll go with the Kaiser.
Kaiser and Styles, and Styles is a player we're familiar with, a Destroyer player. Kaiser, I'm not actually too sure. We could do a player search on him, figure out what class he plays. I don't know if you know any more about him.
I have no idea.
But Styles, he's made it far into these tournaments before, but I think as of late he's been fairly quiet also. I just did a player search on Kaiser, and he's a Blade Dancer, so it's going to be a standard Blade Dancer versus Destroyer matchup. I do expect Styles to move on, but who knows? I mean, he hasn't really shown up a lot in these last few tournaments. Maybe he can make a return. And then we have Bound versus Remo. Any thoughts on that?
I think that in terms of play styles, like, let's say we were to compare him to Enda and to Bison, for example, I feel like both of those players have a little bit more experience than Remo does over summoners, just from my perspective so far. I could be wrong about this, just strictly speculation here, but I can definitely see Bound going ahead, just simply because, like I said, from what I've seen, Remo's been kind of like a more, not necessarily defensive, but a little bit more passive in comparison to the Destroyers. And so because of that, I definitely see Bound going up ahead for that one.
And just interesting to know, I think Hongi and Floetic were two of the Force Master possibilities in this tournament, and they've already been knocked out, right? So Force Masters that we still have remaining that I know of is Madoshi and Suji, I think, is still in. We still have a bit, but the bracket down is going to be the area of the tournament where you start seeing players like Daka and Pomp. And Daka is actually already through his round of 16 match, and he played his pathway was Flotic, and he knocked him out, and then Jaxi, and he actually knocked Jaxi out. So Daka is now set into the quarterfinals, so we will be seeing the return of the champion again, at least in the quarterfinals. And then the bracket under him is going to be Pomf versus Range, I think. I haven't zoomed out too far. Renge? Reng?
We'll go with Renge.
Renge. Pomf versus Renge. I expect Pomf to move on, but upsets could happen, certainly. And that's going to be interesting because if Pomf does actually move on forward, one of our first quarterfinals matches is going to be Pomf versus Daka. And then we can see if the triangle holds true.
Yeah.
Moving on, it's going to be Restel versus Suiji in round of 16, which is actually already done. And Suiji moves on. And you actually told me a little bit about Suiji. You said he was a very good Force Master.
Mm-hmm. I think that Suiji is just under Madoshi in terms of I think there's a difference in class understanding. From what I know, Madoshi actually has multiple alts sitting around like 1700 plus. So he has a lot more class understanding than Suiji does. And because of that, I think Suiji does have a chance. Just from what I know, but at the same time, in terms of who I believe is the stronger Force Master, I definitely would put money on Madoshi for sure.
Okay, very interesting. And so, depending on what happens, we could end up seeing both of them moving on in the tournament and seeing how they end up dealing with their different opponents. But that's gonna be. I feel like they have very different matchups because the one person that's gonna stand in Suji's way is going to be Panda Stick, and he was actually faced up against Bison. That was the match that we watched in the quarterfinals last week, Bison versus Panda Stick, and as we saw, Panda Stick moved on, and this time around it actually happened in a similar way. The game was 2-1, and Panda Stick does move on to the the quarterfinals. So in the round of 8, Suji is going to have to face Panda Stick, and that is a matchup that we haven't seen, Force Master versus Summoner. So that's going to be a very interesting viewing experience, I think. In the quarterfinals, we already have some very crazy matchups. We have Daka possibly versus Pomf, and if Renge beats Pomf, I feel like that's going to be even more interesting because I'm going to be curious who was good enough to stop Pomf, right? Mm-hmm. So Suji versus Panda Stick is going to be one of our quarterfinal matchups, and going back up in the bracket, actually it looks like we have a resolution from Hadoshi versus Enda, and guess what happened?
What happened?
Enda prevails again, and Madoshi, despite all his hard work and his practice, just falls short. Maybe, that's one of the things about Enda. I think he's a very good tournament player, right? I mean, we make fun of him a lot because of his whole red blue thing, but it's really a lot about the mind games, right? And it's that extra amount of pressure that you put on your opponent, because every time you play in a tournament, people think very hard about, what they want to do, because one little mistake can mean a difference between you moving on and getting eliminated. And so these small changes can really make a big difference to what may seem like insignificant in the latter scenario, because you can play so many games and you have all the time in the world. In the tournament, the only thing that matters is the present, right? And maybe that's just what puts Enda over Madoshi in these scenarios.
I think that out of all the players, I think that Enda probably has one of the best tournament mindsets, just simply because he's kind of, and ever since his stream, he's the one kind of guy, and this is something that I respect him for. He deliberately puts pressure onto himself. He puts a lot more things on the line, and because of that, his reputation is at stake for a lot of the things that he does, and he backs it up. He actually he says a lot of things. Not everything is actually the nicest things, but at the same time, though, he does put this pressure on himself, and he succeeds. He overcomes it, especially since his matchup with Jason, which he honestly was not going in his favor, underestimating the ex-world champion. I think that after that scenario happened to him, it's like once you put yourself in the worst possible scenario in terms of your reputation, you really don't have much else to lose. You know what I'm saying? Or rather, there's not much left to be scared of. Now at this point,
right?
Yeah.
He always fights very hard, and that's definitely a valuable thing for a tournament player. Because a lot of people will practice under very relaxed conditions, you know, in
Yeah.
the comfort of their own room, you know, on ladder. You lose a game, you think about it, you move on, you do it, you queue again, and you win, right? But in the end, just like I said in the tournament, the only thing that matters is the now, and perhaps like this just means that players like maybe Badoshi needs to start practicing with the idea that like, okay, these next 3 games I have to win 2 of them. I have to. If I don't, I've considered that a failure. You know what I mean? Rather than just being like, okay, I need to figure out a way to consistently win over time, and he keeps doing this thing, so let's try this, and let's try this, let's try that, and keep like trying little things and being okay with losing. Maybe it's time to start thinking about practicing how to, you know, guarantee your win for 2 games in a row, you know, at least push it that far. And when you start putting that pressure on yourself, then you start playing the game a little bit differently. And I can really see that through Enda's gameplay, you know, like he's always pushing things to the limit. He's making drastic changes, and he's making very practical changes, right? But that being said, you know, different strokes for different folks, right? I feel like there's a lot of different characteristics and a lot of different players that have made it far in this tournament scenario that have different approaches to the game, right? For example, somebody like Pomf or somebody like Daka, right? I feel like they're very different players from Enda. Similar in the way that they're very skilled at what they do, but different in their approach of the game and how they react to pressure and how they decide to win over their opponent, right? For example, if I were to put a descriptor on Daka, you know, I feel like the way he plays is just a very calculated game. You know, he has a very calculated way, a defensive plan, an aggressive plan, and he will play that out according to how he sees it. And so it's not necessarily about mind gaming your opponent, even though that does exist for him. But I feel like his focus in general is on the bigger picture. Like, okay, in general, this is what this matchup should look like. Let me try to play to it and push it in my advantage.
I think that, like I said, I think one of the things that I've noticed about these players is that because of the way that you represent yourselves in tournaments, people have these images of you. And definitely when it comes to Daka, or Errol as his in-game name, is that most people perceive him to be this defensive player, you know what I'm saying? Like putting this image of him, like, you know, like pushing, like, you know, and he will always be able to push himself out of that image. And I think that when it comes to Daka, like I said, I definitely commend him. I think that he probably has the strongest mechanical knowledge of the game.
Yeah.
He's got the most experience, he knows what works. Heck, he's even showed me a few tricks myself too, and because of that, I feel like he's the type of player who tries to make things. He's not very. I don't think he's very instinctive. I think he's very like, this is like you were saying before, and I don't mean to be the type of guy to repeat things that are being said, but this is how he sees it. This is what he wants done. This is how he's gonna go. He plays really efficient. He's like a robot. That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the big takeaway is he's a different player than Enda, right? Because I don't think that's very true of Enda. You know, if you were to say, is that the way Enda plays? I would say, no, not exactly, you know? And the difference I'm talking about is not that far, right? Because obviously for every top player, you need elements of everything, right? You need to be able to be flexible. But if I were to assign a defining feature for each of these players, then I would definitely say, you know, there is space in Blade and Soul to express different personalities and different characteristics, and you can clearly see that between these 2 players that we're comparing. Alright, the quarterfinals are just about to get filled, and we're gonna get going once that starts, and I think we do already have our first quarterfinal match that we will be casting. That's gonna be Arrow versus Enda, so that's gonna be an assassin versus a destroyer. A very interesting matchup. I have heard talks about people saying that the assassin is favored in this matchup. Could we see an upset?
From what I've learned, on paper, right? We're talking on paper, we're definitely seeing assassin having an advantage over destroyer. But from Enda's confidence, what he's been telling me is that lately he's been digging into Arrow's mind. So he feels like he understands what Arrow is up to, and he feels like he can catch him. So definitely one match where hopefully, you know, like can go either way. Arrow is honestly probably one of the most annoying assassins to deal with. I'll be honest here, and you know, whatever happens, happens. I'm really looking forward to this match.
Yeah.
Get everything set up here.
And also to remind the viewers not to confuse Arrow with Errol. And we might, you know, throw those terms around a little bit. It might sound a little confusing, but all you need to remember is that there's Daka, who is the previous tournament champion winner, and then there's Arrow, who is the assassin. So that can be a little confusing, but shouldn't be too bad unless they're facing each other, which would be quite interesting, needless to say, because they're on opposite sides of the bracket. I think they could only face each other in the finals. But yeah, let's see if he moves on. And with his confidence against assassins, it's going to be interesting. I'm excited to watch that. We still haven't found what the match is below that. It's going to be Bound versus either Styles or Kaiser. And then we have Daka versus Pomf and Suji versus Panda Stick. So we'll get started with the tournament soon, guys.
Yeah, just sit tight, boys. It's coming soon. Soon TM.
Soon TM. So a lot of interesting things can happen here in this tournament. And I think we're well set up to have a tournament just as exciting as the European one. If you guys didn't catch it, you should definitely check out the European tournament. I think we already kind of spoiled it, but if you want to see great Kung Fu Master gameplay, there's a lot of very good information that you can get out of that tournament. So that's the Imperial EU tournament number 2. And if you guys want to check that out, it will be in the VODs on the Imp BNS channel. Additionally, we have a giveaway, do we not, Flo?
Yes, we actually do have the same standard giveaway that we've had from last week. We are giving away an Initiate Pack. In order to be eligible to win the Initiate Pack, make sure to go ahead and follow the stream. While you're at it, while you're following the stream, you can also check back on previous videos if you click for further details for IMPBNS. Quick sellout moment here. If you haven't already, if you like us and you want to hear more of us, you can check out my boy Radio Rainy here over at Twitch TV/RainisDay. He likes to do a lot of shoutcasting. I think it's part of both his hobby and perhaps his passion. So definitely looking to cover a lot more material when it comes to BNS. I also stream on Twitch TV/FlowerRoll if you're looking for, I guess maybe both casting, gameplay, and other random stuff that I do, because I've been streaming for quite a long time. So yeah, I think the matches are almost about ready to wrap up.
All right,
let's possible for you
start setting up the 3v3 lobby.
Yeah. If it's possible for you to grab Enda, that'd be great, and I'll grab Arrow whenever he's ready.
Let me actually ask Avarice if we have anybody to fill our lobbies. Oh, Red Eyes is in the stream. So I suppose let me just ask in the Discord then.
Yes, 9. All quarterfinal matches will be streamed. If you haven't already got the link to watch, to be caught up with the upcoming matches, just feel free to click that link and follow along as we go through each of the quarterfinal matches, up to the semis, and finally up to the finals. Just getting sure we got all the spots filled up.
Alright, so my lobby is actually ready to go. I got Satellites waiting in here to help me out, thanks to him.
Alright, and I got Arrow, and hopefully I can get one other person here. Anybody? Let's see if I can get Spiral or something to sit in here. Okay, well my party's pretty much ready. Hope that you guys